Takumi Fujiwara enters a corner at such a high speed that seems too fast. He starts trail braking in a straight line and then turns in, still with his foot on the brake. As he's turning in, he understeers the front wheels, making them a wall of blocking friction, all to brake harder as he starts leaning, letting those G's press on the outside of his 8.6. The braking lifts up the wheel speed ratio, sliding the rear end. Sometimes he'd have a wide, big angle drift that at first glance would be wrong, but the fact that it's a four-wheel drift justifies it to a point. The rear wheels can still push the engine. This braking drift brakes the car efficiently, fast enough, rotating the 8.6. And although the blocking friction slows him down a little bit through mid-corner, the speed lost is the sufficient speed lost in order to complete the corner. As part of braking, he's braking in mid-corner, but then he falls into a little too much oversteer to the point that he needs to counter-steer, an over-rotation. Mostly because he just over-rotates, wheel speed ratio too high, or too much weight transfer, braking a bit too loose. But sometimes, as he accelerates out of the turn, the wheel speed ratio is lifted higher because of the understeering front wheels, forcing him to exit the turn, counter-steering with his rear wheels pushing offset from the trajectory of his engine. There's decent exit speed, but it's more maintained than produced. Takumi has amazing, mind-boggling, insane cornering speed, but I'm sure you can gauge his weakness. His exits were set up nearly perfectly. He faced the exit before he opened the throttle, but the execution was wrong. He exited counter-steering with big drift angle, not pushing the engine but rather pushing the void, offset from the engine. This made his power inefficient. He couldn't put all the power down. Although for the races he ran, it was good enough. But then, versing Shingo Soji in a gum tape deathmatch, he learned that with less drift angle, less counter-steering, he can accelerate harder, open the throttle wider, enjoy more speed, because he was all the closer to perfectly pushing his engine. It wasn't as offset as before. Versing Ryosuke Takahashi, his drift was more solid. He was putting down more power. Both Ryosuke and Takumi's countersteer angles were the same. Ryosuke having the small angle of countersteer and this extra drift angle due to the rear wheel steering his FC RX-7 has. It was right for Ryosuke to have this little bit of angle and not have a perfectly zero counter drift, because due to the rear wheel steering, only by the extra angle could the rear wheels align in the trajectory of the engine, the trajectory of rotation. So we use the angle relative to his rear wheel steering, push the engine in the trajectory of rotation. But a zero counter drift is what was rightful for the AE86, since it doesn't have rear wheel steering and the engine is in the front position. But once Ryosuke overtook Takumi, that's when Ryosuke saw the first glimpse of the Fujiwara zone. Few turns Takumi pulled off a near perfect exit, accelerating with a zero counter steer drift. He put a careful eye to his driving while he was versing Ryosuke. You'll see that the speed that he exits these corners is much more rapid than before, because he was desperate to win, and so he was listening to his car more, using the gutter too in order to get to Ryosuke. He was determined and persistent. Then Ryosuke realized that his front tires started losing pressure, hence started losing grip. Exiting one of the last few turns, his fronts understeered, killing his rotation, forcing him to exit below optimal speed, being driven wide and all. Heading towards the fast S-curve, Takumi, who had taken the gutter on the previous corner, had good exit speed and came beside Ryosuke. They took the S, then Ryosuke's tires gave out, killing his rotation once again, sending him wide. Takumi took the inside, deploying the greatest overtake of the initial D. Then Ryosuke lifted off the throttle in awe at Takumi's driving. He surrendered the fight. I know why, but I don't know why. Honestly speaking, I think Ryosuke might have had a small chance. Yes, there were a few corners left that were like right at the end, but I think he did that on purpose. Takumi learned more about his car, Ryosuke taught him a lot, his car got faster, he refined his technique, he honed his driving, and great things came of it. Keisuke also taught him a lot, and Takumi taught Keisuke a lot. Takumi honed his technique and used a whole lot of different methods, all to accomplish one thing: drive his Toyota Corolla Panda Truino AE86 the right way in order to bring out its full potential. Drive it at its cornering top speed, and move at the speed of light. He honed a whole lot of other techniques in his pursuit to go faster, get the max out of his car, and then some. He owned a few other techniques. His brake drifting just got a hell of a lot faster. But it wasn't always just the brake drift that he used to do. You see, he also honed this other technique called shift locking. What this is downshifting without rev matching. What you're doing is locking the rear differential, skidding the rear wheels quite aggressively. It's not as progressive as a braking drift, and the aggression does kind of throw the rear end to the side. But the downshift also slows down the rear wheel, so the drift angle that might lift up the wheel speed ratio a little too high is justified by the downshift, kind of. And then from the downshift, you'd be in the perfect rev range to immediately slam on the gas perfectly out of the corner. Minimal counter steer, sometimes none. You know who we learned this from? Toshio Joshima. But it wasn't just learning how to accelerate more efficiently out of the corner, putting all the weight on the rear end, and sliding in the margin between grip and drift. You see, when Takumi versed Toshio Joshima, something amazing happened. Remember what I said about the Fujiwara zone? While that top level of concentration called the Fujiwara zone, that was refined to quite a high level when he versed Toshio Joshima. Yes, in that race he did lose to Toshio, he was lagging behind. If you watch the initial D, you would know that Takumi is very good at imitating his opponents. On a course he doesn't know, just driving behind his opponents, he can get into the rhythm of the course. Not that he always does the same technique of his opponent, but he can fall into the rhythm just fine. Now in Toshio Joshima, with his perfected rotation, driving not even at the absolute limit cornering top speed, he could drive on a whole lot of different lines. This is what threw off Takumi's driving at first, but I think subconsciously Takumi saw something that Toshio was doing. The way he was exiting corners. Right at the end, when Toshio Joshima hit cornering top speed, went full combat mode on his favorite racing line, Takumi saw something amazing fall before his eyes. He saw driving perfected in what was no more plain determination but rather desperation to catch up. He hit his full concentration mode and he performed the phenomenon, Fujiwara zone. In this high level of top concentration, he heard what his car had to say. And at the corner exit, he managed to shift his weight all the way back, biased onto the preferred tire, whichever one had more grip, using the right part of his tire to get the most grip out of it, and accelerate at such a high speed, at the perfect point of sliding friction coefficient, to exit as rapidly as a four-wheel drive. In the end, he was outran and then he broke his suspension, but he got close to catching the doctor. We haven't seen any sort of thing like the Joshima zone, in a magical way where he darts forward like a ghost, but it was the driver that Takumi couldn't beat, at least straight up. Toshio Joshima had to vomit in order for Takumi to win. The truth is, the Fujiwara zone was refined to quite a high level, versing Toshio Joshima. His overall pace got higher, and he learned all the more how to drive his car right. Ryosuke Takahashi said that Gou Hojo is similar to Takumi Fujiwara. That's true in the context of instinctive driving, which I will get to in a second. But I say when it comes to driving style and technique, there's one driver that I'm reminded of, and his name is Michael Schumacher. Gou performs an aggressive threshold trail brake very late at the end of a straight. He turns in a little to angle his NSX in the trajectory nearly towards the apex. Then he turns in very smoothly until the apex when he releases the brake completely as he opens the throttle, crossing them just like Schumacher. The throttle is open very early and at a low level as he builds it up, keeping the tires spinning at their limit. It's important to note, the exit is not the last few parts of the corner that's kind of straightish. The exit should usually be after the apex. For some people, it's even before the apex. Sometimes Gou uses the throttle to over-rotate a little bit more on the exit if need be, to rotate and not hit a guardrail, or to align his NSX for a coming corner that's the opposite direction. Super crisp, super fast driving he possesses. When Gou goes on full attack mode, he would enter a corner from the outside at a good angle, start braking super hard as he turns in rapidly. This peculiar technique, this aggressive but refined or calculated thrust of the steering wheel with the engagement of the brakes, produces a high level of G-force, but in a peculiar way. The sudden burst of rotation acts like a brick wall of blocking friction toward the inertia. It forces the inertia to change its trajectory to the direction he turned. So the inertia now is helping him turn. In short, the inertia is running on the rails of the front wheels. It's like he's hitting a wall at an angle. The inertia got nowhere else to go because he's maintaining his grip so well. It's aggressive but refined. Everything is calculated. Center of balance slammed forward all the weight on the front axle as he deploys his aggressive braking rotation. He forces the momentum to move in the direction he's turning with the braking rotation as he pushes the engine in the trajectory of rotation. He turns in like a bullet, and then in no time, he already has room to accelerate. And he exits like Schumacher, now and then gives vibes of Fujiwara. Turns out to be a little more than just instinct. Gou's line is relatively a rounded V-line, not as aggressive as Fernando Alonso's V-line. You can say quite a lot like Schumacher's. This is how he can get to his cornering top speed. This is how he can be one of the greatest drivers on the initial D. I think if his head was in the right place, he could have given Keisuke a harder match. A run for his money. It was a bit too easy. He was just not mentally ready. Terrible. But coming back to what Ryosuke said, Takumi and Gou are very similar. This, as I said earlier, is referring to their instinctive driving, their ability to have top concentration, listen to their cars, use their tires most efficiently, use certain parts of the tires they want, instinctively pull out tricks and techniques when they are needed. When Gou entered a corner too fast, he instinctively swung the tail out, deploying a little more rotation for a four-wheel drift. Another time when he was falling behind in the same battle against Keisuke, he entered a corner too fast on purpose and hit the guardrail with the inside of his front bumper to slow his NSX down a little bit and yaw rotate it, or to complete the corner at high top speed. Okay, let me break this down. When he hit the guardrail, it was one instant slam, not a crash, but there was enough contact and enough friction that it slowed the car down at quite a high G-force. It was a sudden slow, unlike it would be if you started braking. And the fact that the hit was on the far inside, it slowed the inside wheel down, rotating his NSX for him. Even Ryosuke used this technique. One day when I was go-karting, the track was wet, and I used this same technique by instinct to slow down quick enough and rotate in the wet. Braking in the wet was simply not fast enough. Sorry, I have no footage. Gou Hojo's instincts is so well refined. I hope you all learned what I've been trying to say from video 1 on the Pistonfury. Listen to your car. The minute you get to the point where you're instinctively pulling out techniques at different times that would work most efficiently for the cornering or the braking or the accelerating of the car, that's when you know you're a driver. You're listening to your car.